The car started at 2:47 in the morning. I know because I'd been awake for an hour already, lying on the narrow cot in that cold cabin bedroom, telling myself I was being paranoid. Telling myself the unease crawling up my spine was just grief talking. Our mother had died 8 months ago. People didn't sleep well after that kind of loss. I was 67 years old and I hadn't slept well in years, long before Mama passed. This was nothing new. But then I heard the engine turn over, and I heard the crunch of gravel as the car backed out. And then it was gone. I lay there for a long time after. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. I kept waiting for the sound of it coming back, for my sister to knock on the bedroom door and say she'd had to run into town for something. Wouldn't be long. I stared at the ceiling with its water-stained boards and the single bare bulb, and I waited. She didn't come back. I got up slow. My left knee had been giving me trouble since the previous spring, a complaint I'd learned to manage in the years since I retired from nursing. 31 years on hospital floors teaches your body to endure. It also teaches you to read a room the moment you walk into it, to know when something is wrong before anyone says a word. The main room of the cabin was empty. The fire had burned down to cold ash. Her sleeping bag was gone from the fold-out sofa. Her husband's duffel bag was gone from beside the door. On the kitchen table, she had left a note. I didn't need much light to read it. 3 sentences, her handwriting neat as it had always been. Emergency at home. Couldn't wake you. Back soon. No name signed, no phone number, no apology. I set the note back down on the table very carefully. The way you set down a glass you're afraid will shatter. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the clearing where we'd parked 2 days ago. Nothing. My sister had driven us 3 hours north to Clearwater Lake. She'd said it would do me good to be away from town for a few days, away from the house and the lawyers and the constant reminders of Mama. You need to breathe, she'd said, touching my hand at the kitchen table the week before. We both do. Let's just get out of here for a long weekend, just the 2 of us. Well, and Dean. She'd smiled like she meant it. She was good at that. I'd said yes because I was tired, and because some part of me still wanted to believe she was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who cried at my wedding and held my hand when our father died. People aren't born cold. Something makes them that way. I'd always told myself my sister had just gotten turned around somewhere along the way. I wasn't being paranoid anymore. She had taken both sets of car keys. She had borrowed my cell phone the evening before. Just for tonight, I want us to disconnect, remember? And she hadn't given it back. My purse was still on the hook by the door. My ID was inside, my bank card, maybe $60 in cash. They'd left me that much at least. Maybe because they'd forgotten it. Maybe because they figured it wouldn't matter. The nearest town was a place called Hardin Falls, a name I'd seen on a green road sign as we turned off Route 9 2 days ago. I hadn't paid close attention to the mileage. 4 miles, maybe 5. Maybe more. I was 67 years old with a bad knee and a growing fury that I decided, right then, in that cold kitchen, was going to carry me every single step. I put on both layers of what I'd packed, drank water from the tap, ate the last of the crackers in the cabinet, found a walking stick in the narrow closet by the door, a wooden hiking pole, someone's forgotten property, and gripped it like it owed me something. Then I stepped outside into the early dark. The air was sharp. Mid-October in the northern part of the state, and the cold had real teeth. The trees around the cabin were a wall of black against a charcoal sky, just a sliver of moon giving anything to see by. I stood on the porch for a moment and thought about my mother. About the way she used to say that fear and anger felt the same in your chest. Only one of them made you run, and the other made you walk straight toward whatever scared you. I started walking. The gravel road from the cabin met the paved road after about a quarter mile. After that it was just me and the asphalt and the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional rustle in the brush that I decided not to think too hard about. My knee complained on every downhill slope. I talked to it the way I used to talk to difficult patients. I know, I hear you, we're doing this anyway. By the time the sky began to lighten, I could see a water tower in the distance. Hardin Falls was small. One main street, a hardware store that wasn't open yet, a diner with its lights already on, and a gas station at the far end. I went to the diner first because my hands had stopped feeling like my hands, and I needed to sit somewhere warm before I did anything else. The woman working the counter was named Flo, according to her name tag. She looked at my state. The double layers, the walking stick, the fact that I was alone at 6 in the morning, and she didn't ask a single question. She just said, "What can I get you, honey?" And I could have wept. I ordered eggs, toast, coffee. I ate every bite. When she refilled my cup, I told her I'd had some car trouble and asked if I could use the phone. She set the landline right on the counter without a word. I called my lawyer. His name was Mr. Callahan. I'd found him through a friend 3 months ago when the legal maneuvering over Mama's will had started getting complicated. He was methodical, patient, and the first person who hadn't talked to me like I was a confused old woman who didn't understand what was happening. He picked up on the second ring. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said, "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday afternoon." That's when I knew it wasn't just about leaving me stranded. He told me calmly, the way he told me everything. My sister and her husband had filed an emergency petition 2 days ago, the same day we'd driven up to Clearwater Lake. The petition claimed that our mother had shown signs of cognitive decline in the final months of her life, and that the will, which left the family home on Birchwood Lane to me, had been signed under those conditions. They had a notary prepared to testify. They had a hearing scheduled for Friday. It was Tuesday morning. "Can they do that?" I asked. My voice was steady. I was very proud of that. "They've been building this case for 4 months, Mr. Callahan said. But there's something else. We received documents last week from a notary we've never worked with. Supposedly a codicil your mother signed in August, 6 weeks before she died, changing the primary beneficiary of the estate." To my sister, I said, it wasn't a question. To her. I looked out the diner window at the quiet little street. A man was walking a dog past the hardware store. Somewhere a bell was ringing, probably a school. Life going on, perfectly ordinary, while mine was being quietly stolen. "I need you to listen carefully," I said. "I'm going to tell you where I am. I need you to tell me what to do next, and then I'm going to do it." He listened, then he told me. The gas station let me use their phone to call a cab from Ridgewood, the nearest larger town 20 minutes south. The cab driver was a quiet man in his 50s who asked no questions and accepted the $40 I had in cash as full payment with a wave of his hand. He dropped me at the Ridgewood bus terminal. I bought a ticket with my card. 3.5 hours later, I was back in my own city, standing in the bus station with my walking stick and my purse and a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I went to my bank first. The branch manager had handled my accounts for more than a decade. He stood up from his desk when he saw me come through the door. He looked the way people look when they've just been told something, and then the something walks in. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said carefully, "we received some paperwork yesterday regarding your accounts." "I know you did," I said. "I'd like to sit down with you and review everything, every transaction in the last 6 months. Every authorization, every document bearing my sister's name or her husband's." He swallowed. "Of course." It took 2 hours. There was more than I'd expected. A joint access request submitted 3 weeks ago, a transfer authorization bearing my signature, which I had not signed, a notification of beneficiary change on my savings account. All of it dated within the last month, all of it convenient. By noon, I had flagged every suspicious document for the fraud department. My accounts were locked against further changes. The branch manager was on the phone with their legal team. His hands were shaking slightly. Mine were not. I called Mr. Callahan from a phone at the bank. He told me to come straight to his office. I stopped at the sandwich shop on 5th on the way. I hadn't eaten since the diner, and I had learned over 31 years of nursing that you cannot do the hard thing on an empty stomach. I sat at a table by the window and ate half a turkey club and drank a glass of water and watched the street outside. I thought about my sister at 12 years old, the year she broke my favorite music box, the one with the ballerina, and then cried so convincingly that Mama believed it had fallen on its own. I thought about the way she'd stood at Mama's bedside in those last weeks, whispering things I couldn't quite hear when she thought I'd stepped out. I thought about the way she'd hugged me at the funeral, long and close, murmuring into my shoulder that we were all each other had now. She must have been planning it even then. Not because she hated me. That would have been easier to understand. She'd done it because the house on Birchwood Lane was worth $340,000, and she wanted it. That was all. 63 years of sisterhood, a mother who loved us both, a family home full of memories, all of it reduced to a number on a page. Mr. Callahan's office was on the 4th floor of a glass building downtown. He met me at the elevator. He didn't comment on my appearance, the double layers, the walking stick, the fact that I'd spent the previous night in a cabin with no car and no phone. He just handed me a legal pad and said, "Tell me everything in order from the beginning." So I did. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "The codicil they filed is a forgery. I'm nearly certain. The notary's license number belongs to a woman who surrendered her credentials 5 years ago after relocating out of state. The signature matches neither the retired notary's known samples nor, critically, your mother's handwriting analysis from 3 authenticated documents in the estate file. The date on the codicil, 6 weeks before your mother died, coincides with a period when she was hospitalized for 10 days with a respiratory infection. She had not signed anything in that window. Her medical records would confirm it." "How long until Friday?" I asked. 62 hours. "Is that enough?" He looked at me over his glasses. "It will be." He worked until 9 that night. I stayed in his conference room while he made calls, drafted motions, coordinated with a forensic document specialist he trusted. His assistant brought me coffee and, at some point, a container of soup from the place downstairs. I called my neighbor from the office phone, a practical woman my age who had a spare key to my house. She confirmed that my sister and her husband had been there that afternoon, that they had stayed about an hour, that they had loaded several boxes into their car. I didn't let myself feel anything about that yet. There wasn't time. I stayed 2 nights at the Belmont Inn, a modest hotel 4 blocks from Mr. Callahan's office. Clean, quiet, anonymous. I paid with my card. I slept better than I had in months both nights, which surprised me until I understood why. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next thing to be taken from me. I was already taking it back. On Wednesday, I filed a police report. The officer who took my statement was young and thorough and wrote everything down without once suggesting I might have misremembered or misunderstood. When I got to the part about the forged notary, he looked up. "Do you have documentation?" "My lawyer does," I said. "He'll send it over this afternoon." He nodded. "We'll open a file." "I know how the system works," I said. "I've been watching it my whole life. I'm not in a hurry." That wasn't entirely true. But some things you say to hold yourself steady. On Thursday, something unexpected happened. I had gone back to the house on Birchwood Lane, my house, my mother's house, my name on the deed, to make sure it was secure after my neighbor's report. I was standing on the front porch, checking the lock when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. My niece got out. My sister's daughter, 29 years old, dark-haired, with the same stubborn jaw her grandmother had. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at me the way you look at something you need to make sure is real. "Aunt Cecelia," she said. "I heard you were. They said you were." "Stranded," I said. "Your mother left me stranded at a cabin 3 hours away with no car and no phone, but I'm fine." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I didn't know. I want you to know that." I looked at her. She had her grandmother's eyes, the same soft gray. "I know you didn't," I said, because I did know. She had never been part of her parents' strategies. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go to court tomorrow morning," I said, "and I'm going to tell the truth." She nodded once, slow. "Oh, then, can I come?" I thought about it. "No, you don't need to see it, but I'll call you after." She reached out and took my hand for a moment. Didn't say anything else, just held it. Then she got back in her car and drove away. I stood there on the porch of the house where I had grown up, where my mother had hung the curtains. I could still see in the front window, where every room held 30 or 40 years of ordinary life. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself clean somewhere between that cold cabin kitchen and this moment. What I felt now was simpler than anger. Ready. The courtroom was small, which surprised me. I'd imagined something grand for this, something proportional to what was at stake, but it was just a wood-paneled room with fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper. Mr. Callahan sat beside me. Across the aisle, my sister sat in a dove-gray blazer with her hands folded and her eyes aimed at the front of the room. Her husband sat beside her. He was wearing a tie that was slightly too short. Neither of them had looked at the door when it opened. Neither of them had seen me come in. I watched my sister for a moment before I sat down. She had Mama's cheekbones, the same shape of chin. When we were young, I used to trace those similarities and feel proud of them, like belonging to the same family was an accomplishment we'd both earned. Now I just looked at her and felt the distance between who she was and who I had believed she was. A distance I'd spent 63 years refusing to measure. She turned her head and saw me. I will give her this. She didn't gasp. She didn't move. She just looked at me with those gray eyes gone absolutely still, and I looked back, and neither of us looked away first because the judge had begun to speak. The hearing was supposed to be a routine verification of the contested codicil. My sister's attorney had prepared for a quick proceeding. He had his documents. He had his notary affidavit. He had presumably assumed that the woman whose estate was being redirected was 3 hours away with no way home. Instead, that woman was sitting across the aisle in a dark green blouse, and her lawyer was already on his feet. Mr. Callahan presented the forensic analysis first. The notary license number on the codicil belonged to a woman who had surrendered her credentials 5 years ago. The signature matched neither the retired notary's known samples nor, critically, my mother's handwriting analysis from 3 authenticated documents in the estate file. The date on the codicil coincided with the period when my mother had been hospitalized for 10 days with a respiratory infection. She had not signed anything in that window. Her medical records confirmed it. The judge asked my sister's attorney to respond. He tried. He talked about possibility of error, about needing time to verify. The judge listened with the particular patience of someone who has heard every version of delay and doesn't intend to grant it. Then she asked if I wished to speak. I did. I told her about the cabin at Clearwater Lake, about the note on the table and the missing car and the walk in the dark, about the call to my lawyer from a diner counter, about the bank documentation showing unauthorized access requests. I was calm. I was specific. I gave dates and times where I had them, and I said clearly when I didn't. When I finished, the room was quiet. My sister's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her husband. He whispered something back. My sister sat perfectly still. The judge looked at the documents in front of her for a long moment. The contested codicil, she said, is disqualified on grounds of suspected fraud. The original will stands. The property at Birchwood Lane remains the sole property of the estate's named beneficiary. She looked up. I'm also referring the notarization irregularities to the state attorney's office for review. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down once. I sat for a moment after everyone started moving. Mr. Callahan put a hand briefly on my arm and said, "Well done." I nodded. The room was already filling with that post-hearing shuffle, people reaching for coats and briefcases. I stayed still while it happened around me. My sister stopped beside me on her way out. Her husband was 2 steps ahead, not looking back. She stopped, and I looked up at her, and for a moment neither of us said anything. "I needed that house," she finally said. "Not sorry, just explaining." "It wasn't yours to need," I said. She pressed her lips together. Looked for a moment like she might say something else, then she walked out. I didn't go to Birchwood Lane right away. I went back to the hotel, changed out of my court clothes, sat on the edge of the bed for a while in the afternoon light. Thought about my mother, about the way she used to move through that house like it was an extension of herself. Opening windows, tending the roses along the side fence, humming something she'd never been able to name. Mama had worked 2 jobs for 11 years to pay off the mortgage. She had known exactly what she was leaving and to whom and why. She had written it down and signed it and had it witnessed by 2 people she trusted. And she had been right to trust me with it. I called my niece from the hotel phone. "It's done," I told her. "The house is mine." A long exhale on her end. "What's going to happen to them?" That's up to the state now, I said. I'm not the one deciding that. Are you okay? I thought about the question, honestly. My knee ached. I was tired in a way that went down to my bones. I hadn't slept in my own bed in 4 days. The woman I'd spent 6 decades calling my little sister had left me in the dark and tried to take the only piece of our mother we had left. I will be, I said. I already mostly am. The following Saturday morning, I drove to Birchwood Lane. I had my key. The house smelled musty from being closed up, and I opened every window that would open, same as Mama used to do. I found boxes in the living room, some opened, some still sealed. Things my sister had packed, photo frames, the good dishes, items you take when you believe you're inheriting a place. I went through them without hurry. I put everything back where it belonged. In the afternoon, I found a pair of gloves in the garage and went out to the rose bed along the fence. The bushes had gone ragged. Mama would have hated that. I found the pruning shears on the shelf where they'd always been, and I worked for an hour in the cool October air, cutting away what was dead, leaving what could still grow. When I went inside to wash my hands, I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard through the window. Mama had looked out of for 40 years. The light was going gold. A crow landed on the fence post and sat there for a moment, considering me, then flew away. I wasn't the same person who had stood on this property 3 months ago, exhausted by grief and paperwork, wanting only for someone to make it simpler. I wasn't the same person who had said yes to a weekend away, because she was too tired to notice the look her sister and brother-in-law exchanged across the kitchen table when they thought she wasn't watching. I had walked out of that darkness. Not a forest. The particular wilderness that is realizing the people who were supposed to love you had stopped caring whether you lived or simply disappeared. I had walked out on my own 2 feet with a bad knee and $60. And whatever it is that stays in you, after 31 years of watching people pull through things that should have finished them. Stubbornness. That's what my husband used to call it. He said it like a compliment. I thought of him more than once in those 4 days, his steadiness, his laugh, the way he'd squeeze my hand once when things were hard and not say anything because he knew I didn't need words. I thought of Mama too, of the 2 of them gone within 3 years of each other, and me still here, still upright, still in possession of what I'd been given. That matters. Being in possession of what you were given. Not in the property sense, though that matters too, in the other sense. Knowing who you are. Not letting someone rewrite that because it's convenient for them. I made tea in Mama's kitchen, sat at the table where I'd sat 1,000 times. The house creaked a little in the October wind, the way old houses do, and I sat with my tea and let it. There would be more hearings. The state attorney's review would take months. The bank's fraud investigation was ongoing. None of that was over. But I was home. And this time, I already knew something I hadn't fully known before. The door was mine to open and mine to close. It locked from the inside, and I was the only one with a key. If you've been watching from the outside while someone quietly stripped away the things that were yours, your name, your home, your place in your own life, I want you to know this. They count on you being too tired to fight, too polite to make it ugly, too afraid of the word difficult. Don't be too tired. The fight is shorter than you think, and you are tougher than they counted on. Take it back, all of it, while you still can.